The Small Council is the most important governing body in Westeros outside of the king himself. They rule the realm in his stead and control a variety of different domains, from the law to commerce to ships to secrets. Every member of this council is vital, and unfortunately, not every member of this council meets the grandeur of their station. You get a fair few individuals who very much should not have been hired. You have some personality hires, some hires based on looks, a few Nepo babies at various points in history, and today I'm going to be looking at that history. George R. R. Martin has a massive, expansive world, and throughout the 300 years the Targaryen dynasty and now Baratheon dynasty have ruled, a wide number of individuals have come into power on the Small Council, many of whom should not have come into power on the Small Council. I will be looking at the expanse of Westerosi history and determining who is the worst of each council position from any point in that history. Criteria are: I am trying to assemble the worst small council, I'm trying to destroy the realm in record time, and I can pull anyone from any point in history to do it, as long as they served in that position at some point in Westeros' history. I can't say Hot Pie would be the worst master of ships, because he never served as master of ships. So without further ado, I hope that you will join me in this quest to find the worst small council ever, and I'm excited to hear your own picks if you disagree with me in the comments below. Let's dive in. Quick little editor's note before we get started: if you disagree with any of my placements, just assume it can be pretty easily substituted with whoever fills that position in Cersei's Small Council in A Feast for Crows. A Feast for Crows is the fourth book in the series. It really isn't adapted in the show, and Cersei, after seizing power after Tywin's death, essentially fills the entirety of the Small Council with either idiots or sycophants or both, and it's just honestly a joy to read. It's a delight. The only competent person in sight is kind of Maester Pycelle, and even he is quite questionable, insofar as he's been a terrible Grand Maester for everyone else, but it is just so fun to read about this terrible council and all of their doings. And if I had to pick a worst small council at any singular point in Westerosi history, it's probably that. Though, I will say, I would not say they're as bad as the current Kingsguard, where I was able to fill out the worst Kingsguard in Westerosi history pretty much exclusively from the modern set. I think that there are a fair few historical contenders for worst of each of the offices of the Small Council. If you enjoy this video, I'd like you to join my small council by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. That's cheesy and I'm bad at plugging, but I am trying to get to 50,000 subscribers, and I'd appreciate any aid in getting there. Starting off with the most important office on the Small Council, the Hand of the King is a tricky one. I initially thought that this would be a House of the Dragon pick. I thought it would be either Sir Otto Hightower or Sir Criston Cole. However, I don't think either of them are quite at the bottom, though they're both near it. Otto is certainly a better politician than Criston Cole, definitely more reasonable, but he is the reason that the Dance of the Dragons happens, as he is very much grasping for power for either his own house or whatever agenda the Maesters and Hightowers are working towards more broadly. And Criston Cole just continually makes bad decisions for his monarch throughout the war, though he is fairly effective at actually perpetrating the war, at least in the show, in the lead up to Rook's Rest. But no, I think that the most terrible Hand of the King comes from a little closer to the main series. Not in the main series, mind you, though we do see him in flashbacks, but the actual worst Hand of the King is Rosart. Rosart is not a lord, he does not belong to a major house, but he was the Grand Master of the Alchemist Guild under Aerys II Targaryen. The Alchemist Guild are the people we meet with Tyrion in Book in Season 2. They make all of the wildfire in King's Landing, and generally are pyromaniacs, at least in the case of Rosart. Aerys II, according to Jaime, had a habit of chopping off hands. We know of many individuals who served him, such as Lord Merryweather, Tywin Lannister, and Jon Connington. All three of these individuals were eventually dismissed and replaced with Rosart, who very much enabled the king's worst desires. He is the individual who very much steers Aerys into burning people. He is at least partially responsible for the burning of Eddard Stark's father and brother, and when it comes time for the siege of King's Landing and eventual sack of King's Landing, it is Rosart who encourages Aerys down the path of burning them all, caching wildfire underneath various important locations in King's Landing, and trying to blow him up. He would have if not for Jaime Lannister killing him. He's so little remembered that when it's found out that he's killed in the aftermath of the sack of King's Landing, nobody asks why or how or what happened, and this entire wildfire plot essentially goes unnoticed until the main series, with Jaime's kind of confessions to Brienne. The next position to discuss is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and before doing so, I feel the need to share a quote from Barristan Selmy's chapters in A Dance with Dragons. To quote from that book, Some Kingsguard had been heroes, some weaklings, knaves, or cravens. Most were only men, quicker and stronger than most, more skilled with sword and shield, but still prey to pride, ambition, lust, love, anger, jealousy, greed for gold, hunger for power, and all the other failings that afflicted lesser mortals. The best of them overcame their flaws, did their duties, and died with their swords in their hands. The worst, the worst were those who played the Game of Thrones. Barristan Tell Me thinks this just before playing the Game of Thrones. That quote very clearly sets up the fact that Criston Cole is the worst Lord Commander of the Kingsguard to ever exist. We don't know of many bad Lord Commanders of the Kingsguard outside of probably Jaime, who could also be the other main candidate for that spot, but R being in Jaime's head in the main series makes me more sympathetic to the idea that he will do better in the future, especially given that his tenure is not done, whereas Criston's very much is. But Criston accelerates a war that kills not only most of the dragons, but many, many people across all of Westeros. In the books, it's not Otto who is given the blame for the war, but it's Criston. He is called the Kingmaker for a reason. I think that very much shows that he is putting politics ahead of any sworn duty he has as a member of the Kingsguard, and that's not good. I'm not a fan of that. That's I know, controversial take, but I don't really like this Criston Cole fellow. I've talked in the past about Master of Laws being a fairly vague and nebulous position with duties that really aren't defined in either the books or the show, which makes it difficult to discern a singular worst Master of Laws. But I think I have one pretty solidly. It's a character I like, which is unfortunate, but that's Renly Baratheon. I think that Renly very much fails as a Master of Laws in that he does not uphold one of the central laws of Westeros, that being basic feudal inheritance. It is not that hard to get to the fact that, hey, my brother is older than me. He should be king ahead of me, given that all of my other brother's kids are bastards. Renly is essentially responsible for the War of the Five Kings, dragging on to any extent past a Clash of Kings and most of the worst of the bloodshed. And I think that all comes down to his kind of not unknowing, but actually kind of knowing ignorance of the laws of Westeros, which really doesn't make sense given the fact that he was a master of laws. I don't know. It annoys me. I do think that Renly's a lot better of a character in the book. You can very much see how he's being manipulated, but even that extent, with the Tyrells backing him, he should have taken Stannis' offer to be made Stannis' heir, because, like, that would very clearly make Renly's line the ruling line after Stannis died, which I assume he's going to die of a stress heart attack like 5 years later if that happens. I'm going to put up two Masters of Coin for the worst of the worst, one of which is a spoiler, but I'll get to that in a second. Littlefinger is up first. Littlefinger looks like the perfect Master of Coin. He's always got enough money for everything. It's great. He's great to be around for all of the rulers he serves. However, we know how this happens. We know that Littlefinger is secretly borrowing massive sums of money from all throughout the world, some from the Lannisters, mostly from the Iron Bank of Bravos, and this greatly decreases the power of the crown as we see a number of issues arise because of these debts. It's because of this debt that Cersei ends up rearming the Faith Militant and getting imprisoned. It's because of this debt that the Iron Bank begins backing Stannis instead of the Iron Throne, though Stannis should have the Iron Throne. Littlefinger is a very bad Master of Coin, though it seems to be at least partially intentional, because he is a very smart guy and clearly knows his way around money. However, on the opposite side of the coin, with someone who I don't think is that smart of a guy, we have Bartimos Celtigar. We don't really know, based on House of the Dragon, that he is Rhaenyra's Master of Coin, but that is his position. And throughout the Dance of the Dragons, I'll give a brief spoiler warning here, he ends up implementing so many tax policies that Rhaenyra is made incredibly unpopular. And those unpopular decisions greatly lead to many negative outcomes for her in the war that I'm not going to super detail right now because I don't want to super spoil things in case people didn't click off with that little spoiler warning. Regardless, it is him that ends up causing two massive things that lead to Rhaenyra's downfall, one of which being his taxes, the other being kind of increasing Rhaenyra's distrust of bastards, which he very much speaks to not only in the show, but even later on in the book. And this leads to a number of things going quite wrong for Rhaenyra. Both him and Littlefinger, I'd say, are tied for worst Master of Coin. I hate to do this. It really pains me. I don't like being objective, but I have to. That's the job. This is journalism first and foremost. But it is sad because I really like this character a lot. But unfortunately, Arain Waters is pretty definitively the worst master of ships in Westerosi history. He's not technically a master of ships. Cersei names him Grand Admiral, but it's the exact same thing. What he does is build a new massive war fleet. Good, positive, thumbs up. Good, very master of ships thing to do. Very, very mindful. But then he steals all of them as soon as Cersei is imprisoned because he used thieves and criminals from the dungeons to crew them. So, in freeing them and allowing them to be part of his crew, he allows them to have complete and utter loyalty to him. And it seems quite likely to set himself up as a pirate king in the Stepstones. So, that's not great. That's not a good master of ships thing to do. I would advise against hiring him again. Grand Maester is also tricky. It's not a position that we know a lot about. We tend to know a lot about the Grand Maesters that we know about and nothing about the ones that we don't. I'm going to say by default, the worst Grand Maester is Grand Maester Marion. Grand Maester Marion was appointed to the position by King Aegon V, Aegon the Unlikely, but he is essentially called to court and dies on his way to court. So, I mean, that's kind of worst by default. If we're looking at like people who actually, did shit. Pycelle comes kind of to mind, as he is very much a Lannister sycophant, but with the Lannisters in power, he does a pretty decent job of being a Grand Maester and ruling the realm. Particularly in A Feast for Crows, he comes off as quite impressive when compared to the rest of Cersei's council. If you're reading a chapter with Cersei's council, pretty much just look at what Pycelle is saying, and it's the correct thing to do. That's what Martin does with them, and it's really kind of fun and funny to read. It's made me like Pycelle a little more than perhaps I would otherwise, but I still don't like the guy. He's kind of a creep. There's only one position left, and it's kind of a weird one. The Master of Whispers is not often filled. We know of a lot of times, massive swaths throughout history, where there just straight up wasn't a Master of Whisperers. However, if I have to pick a worst of them, a couple come to mind. Tyenna of the Tower is one. She ends up serving Maegor the Cruel. She's one of his wives, but also serves on his council. And she does a lot to kind of sabotage her other wives. She's one of 6. And overall, just in addition to overall working at Maegor not being able to have a kid with anyone but her, and thus creating more instability for his line. That said, it's Maegor's line, so maybe a little instability is okay there. But overall, she's not the best at everything, given that she is just kind of obviously evil and no one likes her, though that tends to run for a lot of Masters of Whispers. Varys is also up there. He's kind of caught up in his own schemes. With that said, though, he does still provide a lot of very useful information to those around him. And I think that despite these schemes existing, they are long term enough that he really hasn't done a ton to allow them to perpetuate until recently, with Aegon coming into Westeros and him killing Kevin and Pycelle, which is a pretty big deal, in addition to freeing Tyrion and Storm. So he's done a bit. I wouldn't call Varys the worst, though. I think Tyenna is slightly worse. I also want to give one last honorable mention for the worst regent to the Iron Throne being Cersei Lannister by a country mile. I think she beats out Unwin Peak by a very small margin. Unwin Peak was also in the running for Worst Hand of the King, but he's not a pyromaniac, so he doesn't quite get there. But if you haven't read A Feast for Crows, I hope you've read it. You need to. It's hilarious, and Cersei chapters are entirely worth reading just to see how you shouldn't rule a medieval realm. I don't know. She's incredible at everything, and it's wonderful. I love it. They're my favorite chapters in the series that don't belong to a character named John. So that was the list. What do you think? Who's your pick for the worst individual in any of these given offices? I'm sure I'm going to see some Unwin Peaks in the comments below, though he is obviously the best Hand of the King. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Really helps me grow the channel. And yeah, I'm going to have many more A Song of Ice and Fire videos coming for you in the very near future. It is worth noting, however, that I am back in law school as of next Monday, August 26th. So videos might become a little more infrequent, but I'll still try to stick to about one a week. So look forward to that. I will have much more for you coming up. Thank you again for watching. Goodbye, everyone.